So I want to first of all thank everybody for joining us today on November 10th to talk about a very serious and important subject for musicians, artists of all kinds, producers, and those in the music industry that are very serious about growing their music as a real career. This isn't for people that think about their music as a hobby. And we've put a lot of effort into putting this together. I am super excited to have this panel of experts to talk to you about not just growing your brand and how you get started, but in the world of 2021 and beyond, you know, how you can protect your value. So my name is Jasmine Sandler. Some of you that are joining may be from my music world. My artist name is Jazz Rock. And I know actually how important it really is to understand how to navigate the world today in music. It's changed so much in terms of how we copyright music, how we make music is so different today than how it used to be. Issues with band agreements, trademarks, sponsorships, monetization. So we're going to get into all of that today. And I'm really pleased to host this. Again, my name is Jasmine Sandler. My company is JSM for Artists on jasminesandler.com. This webinar is supported by the Musicians Institute, Music Law Pro, Music Business Registry, and the Copyright Alliance. So welcome everyone. And I'm going to turn this over to our wonderful moderator, Ritch Esra.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I really appreciate it. Welcome everyone to what I consider a very, very important fundamental area of the music business today. Today, we're in a world where the power, so much of the power has been given back to creators. We're in an era where the most valuable commodity of all is not getting your music recorded, it's getting somebody to pay attention to it. And the power has been given back to artists and to creators. And with that is a entirely different kind of consciousness today. Today, it's not about, having fun or looking at music, as Jasmine said, as a hobby, but as a career. And that's the way that we're going to be approaching this, this whole webinar, is looking at music as a career and the things that are necessary for you to understand, to have a consciousness to begin to approach your music as a career. So can you start, my question to the panel is, can you start to perhaps address some of the ways that artists, producers today can start seeing their careers as a business? What do they need to be doing initially? How do they perhaps start that process?
Well, I'll start with that if you guys don't mind. So the first thing that you have to do to think about whether you're a producer, an artist, or a band, to think about it as a business, you actually have to define business goals. You need to have a business plan. And I find that too many artists, bands, and producers have zero plan. And they just have this, like I do, love and passion for the music, but that's not a business. You need to have a plan, you need to have it written out. And what that means are, what are your goals? Like, are you looking to be a successful solo artist? Are you looking to tour nationally as a band? As a producer, are you looking to win awards or be a producer that's well-known in a certain genre? And that's honestly, Rich, it's like the first piece is having the goals, writing them down, and having an effective and reasonable plan. And I'll stop there. I have a lot to say, but I think that's number one.
Okay. What about the other two?
Yeah, I can jump in there.
Yeah,
I
please.
agree with what Jasmine said. I think it's super important that you really need to just have your plan laid out up front, because that's not just something for how you actually function and how you identify yourself, but it's also how other people see you. So like when you start to look for a personal manager, or if you start to look for a record label, if you want to be signed, if that's your goal, like all of these decisions that you make now are something that you're going to really see throughout the rest of your career. And the music industry is based on relationships. So before you can build relationships, you need to know specifically what it is that you want to do to make sure that your goals and your values align with whomever it is that you decide that you want to work with. So it's really important to get up front. Also, good to determine, like, all right, what stage are we at right now? Like, are we at the stage where we're just operating by ourselves? Do we want to have a DBA, a doing business as of some sort? Do we want to have an LLC and actually try and protect our assets some? Like, is that needed at this stage, or when do we do that? So these are just really important things to start thinking about from day one, to just get yourself organized and really just set up in the long run.
Okay, Kevin, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would just, I know we're going to get into this a little more later, but it's never too early to start thinking about intellectual property and how you are going to monetize and protect that, whether that's copyright in your actual music, whether that's trademark in your branding, that's the earlier you start thinking about it and understanding how that plays into your ability to build your business and monetize your creative content, the better.
Okay. One thing that was so interesting in listening to you guys all give your answers, especially Jasmine and Alexandra, was that you spoke about the fact that you really need to have a plan, which means that you really need to have an understanding of who and what you are as an artist and what your goals are, what it is you want to achieve. I guess my question is, what are the most important things? What do people need to be doing initially if music seriously is a career path, as opposed to just, a fun hobby? Where should someone who, let's say, is beginning, they don't have a band together, they haven't been playing for years out in the clubs, they're starting, they're serious about this is a career path for them. What are the initial steps that they need to be doing?
Well, I'll start that. If they're just thinking about music, if they want to do music seriously as a career, whether it's as an artist or someone that works in the music industry, it doesn't really matter. They need to determine where they want to play. You know what I mean? I don't mean, I mean where they want to play in the industry or as an artist. So if it's genre specific, or if it's title specific, or if it's location specific, it's actually a lot to think through, because if you look at the charts, right? The charts say, hip hop and country, right? These are like leading revenue genres, but maybe that's not what you resonate with. So you actually, if you want to build an authentic brand, it has to resonate with you, and it has to be something where you really feel like you can grow your skills in that area, and it's something you want to commit to. So that's what I would say to that.
Okay. Alexandra, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think on top of that, like definitely those factors, but also just figuring out what level of success you're aiming for, because not everybody wants to be the next Beyonce, the next Justin Bieber. Like, do you want to try and be a superstar, or are you okay just doing smaller things and it's just music something you love, or is it that you're trying to make money? Like, I think you really just need to determine personally, like what it is that you are trying to do within the music industry. Because again, like networking, connections, they're all interconnected, and you're going to meet people based on that. So like, again, the example of a personal manager. Some personal managers are looking for brand new artists who they can really help develop. Others need some that are already established, who have some sort of following, who want to be a superstar. So it really just depends on what it is that you're actually looking for, and just figuring out what level of success do I want to have? Who do I actually want to be in this industry? How much do I care about values? Like, do I actually want to make sure that I'm working ethically? Or I always say you should work ethically, but it's the music industry. Some people are shady, like that's out there, if that's your business. So it's just determining upfront, like, who are you and what do you actually want to do?
Okay. You mentioned about the aspect of artists, managers, and so forth, and the help that you may need. Let me ask you, from your experience, Alexandra, at what point should an artist be at, perhaps before they start getting to the point where they start thinking of a manager? Is there a point in a career that you feel someone needs to be at before management can actually be an asset to them?
That's a great question. And I'm actually working through that with one of my clients right now, trying to figure out, like, are you at that stage yet? And it really, again, just depends on what your goal is. So, and it depends on the different types of managers. So different managers look for different things. There are plenty of managers who love working with newer artists, so you don't have to have the big following yet. And then there are other managers who are like, nope, you have to have like at least 100,000 followers on Instagram. You have to have at least like 1 or 2 albums out and lots of followers and listens on Spotify. So the unfortunate thing with the music industry is it can be a numbers game, and you do have to track that and make sure that you're figuring out what's going on. I would say though, probably starting out, you do want to make sure that you have your team in place. And I think the first people that you try and put on your team are generally like, all right, I need a personal manager to help me build and develop my career. And then also, like, I need a lawyer who can help me make sure I'm not getting myself into crappy deals off the bat that I'm tied to for a number of years. But the manager is something you don't want to rush it. Like it's not a set number of, or it's not a set number of years or set number of listens or likes. It's all about personal relationships. Like they are very, very involved in pretty much every aspect of your career. So you want to make sure that whoever you bring on, you have a really good relationship with them, you're comfortable with them, you trust them. So you want to just make sure that it's not rushed. But once you do meet that person, and if they like love your career and are passionate about you, then at that point, I'd say like, go for it. See what they're willing to do. Work with each other on a trial basis before you sign something and just see if you actually like each other and how it works. So just making sure to answer the question, like, when should you do it? When it feels right, like when you actually find someone that really believes in you and when you think you're at that stage where they can help you to that next step that you have been missing thus far.
Okay, which is an interesting answer to the extent that one of the things I often come across with artists, this is why I asked the question, is that sometimes artists have a misguided notion that a manager will give them a career. As opposed to what you were saying, Alexandra, which is that it's about taking what you have to the next level. But implicit in that statement is that you have a base, there's something there. Labels often, I think, are in that same position. I'm fond of saying that labels in the past, having come from an A&R background myself, it was a faith-based business. Whether it was Berry Gordy or Clive Davis or Ahmet Ertegun or any of these great executives, the A&R person had the faith in themselves and in you that they could introduce you to the world. 85% of the time, they weren't correct. But when they were right, it really, really helped launch a career. Today, so much of that development process is on the artist. And I think understanding the point you were making is really important, what they can do. And I think education, which I guess we're speaking to the converted here to this panel, because you guys in this group here know the value of education. I guess my question is specifically to you, Jasmine. Can you talk? You work with a lot of artists. You're on the front lines of that, as you are too, Alexandra and Kevin. You work with a lot of acts and songwriters. Can you talk about the value of education, continuing education as a writer, as an artist, as a performer, as a producer today?
Crucially important for your career to educate yourself. I think, because I actually come from the business side and fell into the artist side. So I like it because I feel like I'm different than everybody else. I feel like I can really help artists and producers, all those people along the path, understand that the education on the business side, the education on the tools, we haven't talked about that at all, but the tools that are coming out for music, you know, in all these different subgenres of music, you know, deciding which tools are best for your sound is really important. Understanding this whole landscape, which I know we're going to get into, right? In distribution services, distribution platforms, registration platforms, sync platforms, educating yourself on what are these things? How do I use them? How does it benefit me? I spent a lot of time educating artists, you know, and then pointing them to resources. That's how I connected with Alexandra. That's how I connected with Kevin, because I'm always looking for resources outside of branding and marketing that artists need. They need education in every different area, including their own performance. And now, you know, the music industry has changed so much. I think if I were myself as an artist and artists out there, I think spending like a couple hours a day just on, and I do this myself, on music education, whatever that means to you, because I don't know where anybody stands in their sophistication of education on this webinar, you should be spending some time. You know, whether it's music, increasing music theory, understanding platforms, understanding the laws today, going through the Copyright Alliance's website. I mean, there's just so much information. So it's really critical that you're up to speed, both on your performance level and your business level, to be successful.
Today, absolutely.
Yeah, very much.
Okay, let's talk about some of the aspects that I think are necessary. Like you mentioned, tools. You know, when an artist, you mentioned that, you know, an artist is a brand, that an artist has an identity. Let's talk about, you know, what is a trademark? Because a lot of artists have a trademark. A lot of bands have a trademark. What is a trademark and what does it protect?
I can take that one. So a trademark is meant to identify you as the source of where something came from. It's generally like a word or a phrase or a design that's really meant to identify your goods and services. So in the music industry, typically you might see, all right, we have musical goods, which are the actual recordings themselves, like the recording, the MP3 file. We have the actual entertainment services. So we're protecting yourselves, like you as the songwriter, you as the composer, like protecting your actual services. And then there are other things, if it's not just you as a musician, like labels, they might have paper goods that they decide that they want to put their logo on. That's another form of protection. But essentially, it's just identifying you and making sure that when people see your name or when they see your mark, that they're identifying that with you as an individual and not with somebody else in the industry, that it actually does belong to you and it distinguishes your goods from someone else. So that's kind of like what a trademark is. I will say the good thing with the trademark is you are automatically protected in some sense locally just by using it. And then if you wanted to take it a step further, you can register your trademark with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. And that there are some benefits to it, like you get nationwide enforcement instead of just local enforcement. You get public notice that the mark is actually being used. So you're listed on the website. If someone looks it up, boom, it's there. There's information about you and the mark, its use. And if you've ever seen the little like R with the circle in it, you can now use that and be really fancy when you actually put your trademark out there. So there are the benefits to actually registering it and really just making sure that you're fully protected. But there are some basic protections that you have just from using it if it's not registered. So it's not always necessary off the bat, but definitely something to think about once your budget actually allows it.
When your budget does allow it, should you be using an attorney to register a trademark, or is it something you feel you can do on your own?
I would definitely recommend it. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an attorney and because I actually can help register them. I do think it's helpful to have an attorney because the patent and trademark website, it can be a bit confusing. And you have to figure out, okay, what class am I using? What uses are involved? Is it actually currently in use in commerce or is it not? And I actually have someone I'm working with now who they tried to do it themselves or they did it through LegalZoom. Unfortunately, the trademark was denied. And now they had to hire an attorney anyway to try and clean up the mess and try and figure out like, all right, this is how we actually fix it. So it's helpful to just get that help up front if you can.
Can I add a comment? So besides owning JSN for Artists, I own Warrior Women in Business, which empowers women. It's very cool. And I have a clothing brand. It took me a year and a half to get my trademark for the clothing brand because I use LegalZoom. I personally can't emphasize enough to use a lawyer for trademarks. It is a complicated process of multiple categories. And if you don't know what you're doing, you'll lose a lot of time and then you lose money. So I just want to add that.
Okay. How is a trade, often you hear that, what's the difference between a trademark and a copyright? Can you guys give a brief description of the difference between the two?
Sure, absolutely. So a copyright is different from a trademark in that it protects an original work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium and not short phrases or titles or logos like Alexandra was just talking about. So just, some examples of works that are protected by copyright would be, literary works like books or poems or short stories, pictorial, graphic, or sculptural works. So those are like photographs or works of visual art or sculptures, motion pictures and audiovisual works. You also have some things that people don't usually think about, like dramatic works, which will be plays or scripts, also pantomimes or choreographed works. So you can actually copyright a dance routine. Architectural works are protected by copyright. And then, of course, you have musical works, which include a musical work can include two different types of copyright. You have the underlying written composition, which could be sheet music or notation or even lyrics. And then you also have the sound recording, which are the works represented by the fixation of those other musical works I mentioned a minute ago. So when a written composition or lyrics are fixed in a physical digital format, that's a sound recording. And so those are different than, phrases or titles or logos that are protected by trademark. But also what's not protected by copyright would be things like ideas or methods or processes. Those are all usually covered by patent law. And then just to get a little bit, more specific about like the criteria for copyright protection, it's a really low bar of creativity. Like, you can scribble down something on a napkin and that's protected by copyright, or write, the stupidest song or short song in the world, and that's protected by copyright. And the reason why it's a low bar of creativity is because we don't want to, have some government official making a determination of what constitutes art or not. So basically a work just needs to be like minimally creative or original to be considered protectable by copyright. And then one other thing I'll mention about registering. So Alexandra and Jasmine were talking about how it's probably in your best interest to have a lawyer help you register a trademark. And you can certainly have a lawyer help you register a copyright, but the copyright registration system is really meant to be user and artist friendly. And tons of people register copyrights every day without the help of a lawyer. The people at the copyright office are actually really good. You can call them, they'll help you fill it out. And you do want to register your copyright because even though copyright does exist without registration, like I said, you can write something down on a napkin and boom, that's protected by copyright. But you get a lot of benefits by registering it. And really like the biggest benefit is that you can sue someone if they infringe your copyright and you can get damages. But on top of that, it sort of creates a public record of what's copyrighted and what's not. And if someone wants to maybe license your work, they can go into the registry and that's the way they find it. So it's really in your best interest to register. It's not very expensive, and it can be done pretty easily without a lawyer.
Okay, all right. I want to swing back to talking about artists and bands and so forth with regards to if we could talk about some of the ways or some of the steps that artists can take when they're starting their careers. Once they've made those decisions that like Alexandra was talking about and Jasmine was speaking about, once they've made that decision, some of the ways that they can sort of, I guess, create the most unique identity for themselves. That seems to be a very, very important factor today in terms of artists that break through, in terms of the volume that's out there. Can you guys speak to some ways that you feel are perhaps most effective in that, in terms of creating an identity for yourself as an artist?
Yeah, I'll tackle that first, if you guys don't mind, because that's what I do, personal branding. And personal branding is really about identifying who you are, where you want to go, and where you resonate. So my number one advice would be, don't try to be like anyone else. Be like yourself. That's the first thing. And that takes a little bit of introspection and understanding. The second step is when you're playing, whether you're doing a live performance online or you're in front of people, you always want to look for feedback. You want to understand, what do your fans think about you as an artist? I can't tell you how important that is when you're trying to figure out, what is my brand? Because your brand could be sitting in front of you and you don't even know it. So if you talk to the people that hear your music and watch you perform, believe me, they're going to tell you, you sound like X, your band is like Y. That's interesting. And the reason that's interesting is because then from there, you'll get an idea of what genre you have an opportunity to sit in. And then you want to educate yourself on the genre to understand, how am I different? Those are like the basic first steps, because branding is expensive, whether you're talking about time or money. So I actually spend a lot of time with my clients in brand strategy. So before they spend all this money on whatever for the brand, let's figure out who you are, who your fans think you are, so you have the best opportunity to rise above the crowd. It's very competitive and saturated, like you said, Rich. So that's number one.
Okay. Anything that you guys want to add to that?
I can add, and not so much about kind of like what you should be looking for, what you should be doing to create the brand, but pretty much just making sure once you figure that out and what you've gone through all those steps that Jasmine mentioned, now protect your brand. Like now that you have it, make sure that it actually is protected. Like we talked about the trademark, if you wanted to do that for your artist's name, or if you had a logo or a design or a phrase. We have the copyrights for your actual music themselves. There's also contracts that you need to start thinking about, because as you start doing all these different relationships and working with different people, different rights start to come into play. And if you don't have contracts in place, there are various default laws that come into play, but some of those default laws aren't exactly best for you. And now you might end up sharing your ownership or sharing royalties with someone that you didn't actually want to share with, just because they were there and involved in the songwriting process, or just because you had one discussion with them and they'll try now to claim, hey, I was in the room, we talked about this, I have an ownership stake. So you want to make sure that once you start having these discussions with people, once you start creating your music and bringing in third parties, producers, other songwriters, whomever, have a discussion to make sure that you have some type of agreement in place. It doesn't have to be a lengthy 25+ page contract. You can get basically down what you need to have, probably on like 1 to 3 pages, depending on what stage you're at. But you can have like a quick little one-sheeter, email deal points. It can be really small, but just have the discussion and have something in writing. So that way there's no confusion moving forward, to make sure that you really are protected.
One thing I want to ask on that, because that's such an important point that you're bringing up, Alexandra, is the idea that, especially if you're an entity like a band, can you talk about band agreements? Is that something that you feel is an important element for a group of artists or a band to have from the beginning?
Yeah, I think it is important. A lot of bands you talk to will say that they don't have a band agreement, and that's totally fine. Again, there are like default laws in place if you don't, and a lot of bands I work with really don't want to have an agreement, because they're like, oh, it's fine. We all love each other. We all get along. We know what we're doing. But the point of a contract is to plan for the worst and hope for the best. Like, even though you guys are getting along now, it's very possible that down the line, unfortunately, something might happen. Someone might leave the band. So now what happens? Let's say there's 5 of you, one of you leaves the band. While it was 5 of you, you created a whole album together. Who owns the album? Can you continue using it? What are the royalties now? Can you even still use the band name? Like,
Right.
Who actually owns the band name? So these are all things that we would just discuss in advance that can go into a band agreement, just that way you guys are clear, like, hey, not saying anything bad is going to happen, but just in case it does, this is what our relationship is going to look like. So that way there's no confusion moving forward in the future.
Can I add to that? I have 2 quick points to add. As an artist and as somebody that manages artists, you might think using a lawyer and an agreement for a band is like, oh, you might do this and, maybe we'll get to a lawyer. But I can tell you this webinar is about thinking of your music as a career. And when you think about your music as a career, and like me, you have 3 or 4 other bandmates, you need to think about how those people are affecting your money. And so I think it's very important for you to have an outside source to help you navigate through that, because those discussions, if they're, and I've dealt with this with one of my band clients very recently, where they had a problem with one of their bandmates and they just did everything wrong. They ended up having to pay somebody back and it was a big disaster. If you're serious about your band, your career in the music industry, it's important to have that outside support system. So I can say that's really important. And one other point I wanted to make, I saw a question about this, whether you're an artist or you're someone that works in the music industry. When I was talking about branding, I was talking about, from an artist perspective. But in general, one thing you want to do when you go through that exercise of determining your brand is determining what your value is. Like and I know we're going to get into this, but where do you want to monetize? So whether you want to make money from ticket sales, merch, sync opportunities, sponsorships, or whatever it is, that's something else I would say when you're doing your brand plan and your brand strategy to really think about and write down. It will be very helpful for you.
Okay. The other thing I was wanting to mention when you were talking earlier, Jasmine, about creating the identity as an artist, is that I also think it's very important for artists today to know who their audience is. It's amazing how many artists are like, I don't know, I have no idea. Well, I think today in 2021, that is really important to know, because otherwise you're just doing this. Hello, is anyone out there? metaphorically speaking. And I think it's very important, whether you're a metal actor, and I don't mean it in those kinds of like didactic ways, but like really having an understanding of who is your audience. Do you know? Is it men? Is it women? Is it older? Is it younger? Is it college educated? Are they rural? And the point is that information is available today. It's available to you today. It's called analytics. And it's important that you have an understanding who your music is appealing to. One of the things I learned from working at record companies for many years, both majors and independents and in the educational field, is that the number one thing that a label does when they're putting music out, the first question they ask themselves is, who is it that we are trying to reach with this music? I don't care if it's Justin Bieber or a brand new artist on Def Jam or it doesn't matter. Who are we trying to reach with this music? It's not just, oh, we're going to take this and throw it out there and hope that, the most amount of people get it. Not today, it's not. Not in a world where there's 60,000 songs a day. Like you've all been saying, that it's so important to have a plan. And I think that that's one of the important things that artists who are going to be putting music out into the world really have an understanding of. Who is my audience? Who am I trying to appeal to? Of course, ultimately, yeah, you want the widest possible audience, but where are you starting? Where are you now? That's, I think, a very, very important thing for artists to know. I guess what I'd like to do now is I'd like to move, Kevin, you have an element that you want to talk about with regards to copyright. And so I'd like to sort of turn this over to you before we go to Q&A.
And was that on the copyright basics? Or did you want me to move into talking about sort of how musicians get paid and streaming and?
Well, yeah, we can move into, those elements that you wanted to speak about. I guess the how people get paid is a very important element in terms of the income sources that songwriters, artists make their money at. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really important to understand to really know how you're going to get paid and how you can commercialize your creative output is knowing what rights are yours when you register a copyright. And basically, when being a copyright owner means that you actually have many rights. It's sometimes known as the bundle of rights. And really, perhaps the most important one of the bundle is the right of reproduction. And that's really what's mostly implicated in most uses of your work, or in most copyright disputes, to be perfectly honest. A reproduction means someone is reproducing your work, whether that's, if you're a photographer, someone printing that photograph onto a shirt, or even uploading a movie to a website, that's a reproduction. There's also the right to make derivative works, which is implicated when you do things like if you translate a book to a different language, or you make a movie based on a book, or turn a book into a song or concept album. And then there's also the right of distribution, which means basically giving out or selling or transferring a copyrighted work to someone else. For instance, you can own a perfectly legal copy of a work, but that doesn't mean you necessarily have the right to distribute it or sell it to the next person. And then there's also the rights of public performance and display. That really allows a copyright owner to prevent someone from showing or playing their work in public without their authorization. And in music, public performance rights are really important because those are what are implicated when your music is played in public at a bar or restaurant, or even by a streaming service. And that's where you get into sort of registering your work with a PRO, which is short for a performance rights organization. You've probably heard of ASCAP or BMI or Sound Exchange. So as a musician, once you are establishing yourself and writing and recording music, you're going to want to look into registering your work with those kind of PRO entities, because that's the way you're going to be able to track the use of your work by, let's say, a streaming service, and ultimately realize the royalties that are owed to you for the use of your music in any number of different environments. And I'm happy to sort of talk a little bit more about maybe the some of the policies that have been developed over the last few years to help individual creators. If you want me to do
Absolutely,
that
yes,
now?
yes, definitely.
Sure.
Because there have been some significant ones.
Absolutely. So some may have heard of the Music Modernization Act, or the MMA for short. You know, the distribution of royalties in the music business is really complex. I mean, I went to law school, and it's, you know, I've made a career out of copyright, and I find it very confusing. But in 2018, they passed this law to really make the process easier for musicians to get paid by music providers and platforms for the use of their music. And so what this law has done is sort of reworked the framework for mechanical licensing by creating this publicly commissioned centralized entity called the Mechanical Licensing Collective, or the MLC, which basically allows companies like Spotify or Apple Music to obtain a blanket license for use of musical works, you know, rather than try to negotiate on like a song by song basis. It replaces that with a single license to produce a song in a particular catalog. And then music providers are required to report and to pay the corresponding mechanical royalties for their reproductions directly to this entity, the MLC, which then distributes the royalties to the copyright owners. And there's a few other intricacies, like there's a provision that any unclaimed funds have to be held in the MLC for a number of years. So, you know, there's a lot of issues with, you know, unpaid royalties because the platforms simply just don't know who to get the money to. And this sort of takes care of that by holding the money for like a 3-year period and trying to match it with the intended copyright owners. And just a couple more things about the MLC. It you know, it creates this centralized music database that pairs compositions with recordings, and anyone can access that database. Creators can register their works with the database to make sure that they get, you know, timely and accurate payouts for mechanical royalties. And registration with the MLC is, you know, a really simple way for creators to ensure that they're being properly paid. And it's free. So if you're a songwriter whose music is available on digital stream platforms, you know, I'd really encourage you to register for the MLC. And then the last thing I'll mention that something else the MMA did is that included a provision that allows for music producers, mixers, and engineers who are part of the creative process that made a sound recording to receive compensation from royalties that were collected for uses of those sound recordings. And it does so by sort of setting up a process where the rights organization designated to collect and distribute the royalties, which in this example would be Sound Exchange, they would distribute a portion of the royalty payments directly to the producer or the engineer. But there has to be sort of something in place called a letter of direction, which is authorized by the sort of artist payee. So if you're a producer and an engineer and you think you've contributed like enough to a sound recording to receive royalties, I'd say it's really important that you have come to an agreement with, you know, the other sound recording artists or record label who might otherwise collect royalties for the sound recording to make sure that you can take advantage of this new provision in the Music Modernization Act.
So this is something that I mean, that sounds very important, because this is something producers and engineers who are getting money from this entity you're speaking of have to make the arrangements individually with each artist and that they work with. Is that correct?
Yeah, you need this letter of direction. And so, you know, it's just being aware that this is the law now is huge for those groups of producers, because I think for, you know, years and years and years, they would maybe strike deals, you know, on a one-on-one basis, but, you know, which they still need to do to a certain extent. But now they have this law backing them up, which was going to make it easier for them to realize, you know, and get back some money for some pretty big creative contributions that they're making to a hit song or what have you.
Okay. All right. Is there any
I
other
can
fact?
jump in real quick.
Please,
just
go
to
ahead.
emphasize something that Kevin said as well. So Kevin mentioned the different rights involved in a copyright, and I just want to just touch on like that is just so important to really understand upfront, because if you don't, you could potentially be missing out on a lot of different royalties, or you can mess up some different royalties and registrations if you don't understand who actually owns what. Like I've seen way too many times that an artist will buy a beat from BeatStars, they'll use the basic BeatStars agreement, and then not knocking it, the BeatStars agreement can work if you are just doing it as a hobby. But if you're doing it professionally, generally those agreements are missing a lot of stuff that you might need. So, and you're missing out on like, all right, well, who actually does own the composition? Who actually does own the master? And is it just a license, or do you actually own it? And these are all things that come into play when you're registering your copyright, but also when you're trying to collect these different royalties. So it's really important to understand copyright ownership upfront, so that way you can properly collect from all these different entities. Kevin mentioned some of the ways to collect, but like some of the other places on the composition side, you have your public performance monies. So that's coming from your PRO, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, GMR. You have your mechanical royalties, which now comes from the MLC. You also have Harry Fox and music reports, where you can opt in to get different monies and licenses. And then of course there's sync licenses. Then on the master side, your distributor. Are you signed to a distributor? Or are you using someone independently? Like, is it TuneCore, CD Baby, whomever? And then also Sound Exchange for some performance monies as well for those non-interactive streaming services. And of course, producers. So that way they can have an LLD and try and get some monies from the featured artist share. So there are so many different avenues that you can get money. But in order to do that, you really have to understand what you actually own and what your rights are.
Yeah, that's a very important point, Alexandra. And one of the things that I keep learning about is that in the last couple of years, there are even newer entities besides the ones you mentioned that are there to monetize, writers, to monetize artists, to monetize music in a digital sense. I've learned from my friend Michelle Weiss, who's a very good teacher on this subject, that there's many, many, many entities that are new, that are in this particular space that contribute to exactly what you were saying.
I was going to put up a slide very quickly of some of these resources.
Okay, all right.
Because I think it's important. We're at 2:47.
Okay, so we should open.
We still have a few things, and there are some questions. So I think I just want to share the screen very quickly.
All right.
For some of the resources that we put together. Again, this webinar will be recorded. It will be on my website, and I'll be sending out an email. But just so, like, if you want to, today or over this week, you want to start to check out some of the resources that have been mentioned on today's webinar. Obviously the PROs, we talked about ASCAP, BMI, we talked about the talent agents. I think, registering for Kevin's organization, Copyright Alliance, costs nothing, and it's just so much great information. We talked about the MLC, Sound Exchange, there's so much on distribution. Forget it. So there's lots of resources on that. And just to get an understanding of kind of what's going on in distribution today is important. I know Ritch is offering a discount for his film and television music guide. We didn't even talk about sync yet. We might have to have a second webinar. There's so much to say on sync. But I know that, Ritch is offering a discount for his music guide, which is fantastic. So I just wanted to kind of put that up. Maybe you guys can get a screenshot of this, but we'll be sending that out as well. Ritch, do you want me to share a couple of the other slides before we go to?
Yeah, please go ahead. Definitely. Okay.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, okay, so couple other things. So Music Law Pro, Alexandra can talk about it because that's her service, not mine. But I was like, when I first met Alexandra, I said, "You're doing what for artists?" It's just fantastic. And I was so happy to start sending my artists over there because a lot of them are like local indie New York City rock bands. We are small. So so they have a unlimited general legal service, which is really important as you're getting going. The purpose again of the webinar today is like, you really want to ignite your career, do it in a serious way. So they have a professional service. She's providing 15% off. Again, I'll be sharing this later, but just to let you know, I put a link also in the chat for Copyright Alliance, for Music Law Pro, for Music Business Registry, as well as what we do, which is we're JSM for artists. We provide strategy services. We provide branding, marketing, PR, kind of whatever you need. We also work with a network of engineers. So whatever you need to kind of grow, whether it's just a 15-minute phone call. So, I want to give 15% off. We have very reasonably priced services for artists because we also deal with executives. So the whole mission is to help you move forward. And so I've set up an affiliate code, a discount code, artist branding 15 for anything in the artist section on our website, and feel free to reach out. So I just wanted to share those before we got into Q&A, because I know it's going to be, I know we have some questions, and I know we do want, I was talking really fast because we missed a lot on monetization. So Rich, I'm going to kick it back to you.
Okay, I guess you want to talk about, rather than going into questions, you want to talk about some of the monetizations, the different areas or the different aspects that artists need to be looking at to monetize their career?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start and give my
Sure.
list, and then I'll
Yeah, let's talk about some of those. What are the ones that you feel are the most important that artists need to be aware of?
Well, I just was a guest speaker on a webinar on Saturday, which was interesting, for indie bands on merch. So I don't know why I'm starting with that, maybe because I just came off that webinar. But once you develop your brand, again, to go back to my statement maybe 30 minutes ago, and you understand what the value is of that brand and the genre, then you'll start to see where some of these levers for revenue make more sense than others. So I'll just start at the top. Merchandise, right? Merchandise, if you're a national touring band and you're in the rock scene, makes a lot of sense from a general merch perspective. When we talk about innovative merchandise, which could be things like we talked about on Saturday, which are things like, autographed set lists, or like fan art, or doing something or like an exclusive VIP session, listening room type of thing. These are innovative ways to think about how you can monetize in a very online world. The other thing I would say are doing live streams with donations. I mean, even if you don't make a lot of money, I always tell my bands, like, keep going, keep going, keep going. Because if you're building your brand the right way, the purpose is to keep growing that audience. So that's something that can help. What we talked about a lot today was knowing the tools that are out there, right? Like, if you don't understand what Kevin was talking about with MLC, if you don't understand, like I am, I think an expert at TuneCore at this time, but if you don't understand how your publisher is helping you, you don't understand on CD Baby how you're getting royalties. I work a lot with Reverb Nation, love them. If you don't understand where the money's coming in from there, you have to understand that landscape, because there's lots of little monies that can possibly come in. So understanding that in terms of your royalties, obviously ticket sales, are something that we're always going to talk about, but more importantly, now we're looking at innovative ways. So we're looking a lot at sync. And I got to tell you that even with my own band, I've gotten to the sync world in a very non-traditional way. So that's why I always tell people, like, you could be going to get your music on a Netflix show or in a big film, but maybe you're not there yet. So one thing I've done, and I always encourage my band clients to do, is start talking to maybe local filmmakers or game producers. I personally had luck there for myself and my clients, and start offering your music for content. The world now is all about content, and some people are willing to pay for it. Companies, maybe brands, are willing to pay for your music to use it as a part of their commercial, So you have to think very innovative, I guess is my point, when you think about revenues, but there's a lot out there right now. If you start to think and furthermore look at the content that's out there right now that's playing music, it'll give you some really good ideas.
Yeah, it's quite extensive. The world of sync, which is the world I'm deeply involved in, and I know that world very well, it's exploded. I mean, when I started my directory, there were 3 networks, period. Then came cable, then came satellite. Now we have 3,000 different channels, and and the demand for music is quite extensive. As you said, there's a lot out there. and new and innovative ways of it being used in the streaming services, in commercials, in online commercials, in just different in games. The metaverse is going to be using stuff with, online communities. So there's so much to keep up on, which is why I think, the whole thing of educating yourself about the world that you live in today, not the world of the past, but the world of today, in terms of your music, is so, so important. Absolutely. So shall we take some questions from the audience? Jasmine, did you want to?
Yeah, I see 2 questions.
Okay.
I don't know if you got the one, Rich, in chat. Did you get that? Can you look at your?
Okay, I have one question. Yeah. What kind of branding can someone do if they're not a performer? So I take it by that if they're not a performer, then they're a writer. They want to brand themselves as a writer or as something that's an entity, or do you mean as an, because that's kind of a vague question. Do you mean not a performer like Steely Dan wasn't a performer for, 35 years and then they started to perform? Do you mean as an artist, a musical artist, but not performing? Or do you mean as a writer, someone who's not visible to the public in terms of a brand?
As a composer.
As a composer, okay. So as a composer, so what kind of branding can someone do if they're not a performer, like a composer? Okay.
I actually like that question.
All right.
I'm going to quickly give you a client example. So I have a client that I've worked with, I do brand coaching for artists, right? So I've just been her coach for a while, and she's tremendously talented, and she writes scores for off-Broadway, and she kept saying, I really want to get on Broadway, I really want to get on Broadway, I really want to get on Broadway. I was like, okay, well, let me look at your brand. Like, how are you introducing yourself as a composer? Because you want to go, again, to go back to branding, from, let's say, a value of $100, I'm just throwing out arbitrary numbers, to a value of $10,000. So how do we take your brand there, right? So it was really about creating a professional brand around herself first, then her music, and then introducing her into circles of influence for opportunities on Broadway. She actually in the last year got like two deals on Broadway. I'm not saying it's directly from my work, but working with her, I helped her to think bigger. I helped her to think like, how do you want your brand to look? You know what I mean? And that was very, very important. So I think for the person that asked that question, whenever you are composing, you want to determine where it is you want to go with that, and start to see what other composers you think are doing a really good job with their individual brand. And sometimes the answers will come to you, but I'm also open if you want to reach out to me.
Okay, and another question that just came in is, how does one find their sound? I guess that could be, meaning a lot of things. They're creatively find their sound as an artist. I guess artistically, what are some of the ways that an artist can go on that journey?
I'm gonna answer that quickly. I'm sure you guys have things to say, but I can say back to what I was saying before. As an artist myself and someone that works with artists, depending on where you are, right? Because if you don't have any fans, you're not going to be able to know. You're not going to be able to ask that question. But if you have fans, right? Like a lot of the artists that we work with are local or regional acts that want to go national, and they've been doing it a while.
Okay,
and
so they have an identity. Yeah.
They have a certain sound, but now they want to tweak their sound, or a lot of them are going from doing covers to originals. So my first piece of advice with them is really to start talking to their audience and kind of understand. They usually have a very strong small fan base, but it's generally small, And then they have to determine how they can take the kind of staple sound that everybody loves, or the few songs that everybody loves, and kind of build that out to something where they can build a new brand off of that. So that's for existing artists. For new artists, it's kind of my similar answer, I guess. It's really talk as you start to put things out, and that's the other piece, is you should play with your sound. You should play, and now you have so many tools to play with your sound. There's nothing that's off limits in terms of digital music. So there's a lot of ways you can play with your sound and start to share your sound. There's, like in New York, there's 1 million open mics. I mean, they're always going on. And I personally am always testing my sound in open mics, and all the artists I know are as well. So you got to be in the music scene a little bit, to start testing.
So that's an interesting point then, because it goes to the heart of part of the answer then is be willing to experiment in a live setting.
Yeah.
So you have to be willing to put yourself out there. It's not just something that you can do in a vacuum.
Yeah. Oh, also, like I would just mention Music X-Ray. I love Music X-Ray as a tool because I apply for a lot of sync opportunities there. And all of my songs I put out there in Reverb Nation to listening audiences, always, because I get the sound rated, whether they love the engineering, they hate the engineering, they like the vocals, they like the arrangement. So you should take advantage of the tools that are out there. There's online listening audiences of experts, like people like you, Ritch, that listen to these things. And I think that's worth the money, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another way I think of finding your sound is being willing to experiment, being willing to look and say, what sounds or who am I as an artist? What do I have to say? What is it that I'm about? And I think often that leads you into a direction, like what you were talking about your composer client who wanted to go to Broadway, and when you're a composer for Broadway, you are serving a story. That's what the purpose of your music is to serve that particular story, that play on Broadway. It's to be part of that. So I think in finding your sound as an artist, you have to look at what interests you. If you're interested in a specific sound, explore it. It may not be right for you, but you're never going to find what your sound is unless you're willing to search out different kinds of sound for yourself. You have to look at what you love, what you're passionate about. And I think only you know that. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the best at it or that it's right, but you won't know until you actually, get out there and do it, which is why I was intrigued, Jasmine, by your answer about getting out and performing it. I'm always struck by people who say, oh, well, I don't want to perform. And I'm thinking, okay, then you don't want to be an artist. You want to be a songwriter. You want to be somebody who's going to be writing songs for other people. And because there is a difference, and you got to be real clear about that. If you don't want to be an artist, you don't want to be out there performing, you just want to be somebody who's going to record, it's like you're limiting the whole aspect of your career in a very significant way in 2021 if you can't promote the work as an artist if you're not going to perform. There was a time when records actually sold, when music sold pre-streaming, when you could do that, when there was an economic model, but no longer today. At least in my opinion, I think it's very, very challenging if you just want to be somebody who can do that. Although that might be an interesting seminar to find artists out there in the world who have built financial viable careers for themselves without ever performing. I analogize it to like having a relationship with somebody who's never there. Eventually you move on, it's like at some point you're like, it's been fun, but we're gonna move on now. So it's in today, I'm specifically, it's not like a philosophy that I believe, but it's a philosophy that I believe today in 2021, due to the circumstances we've talked about with regards to the market. There's another question here. Is it better to stick to one genre as a new artist to create an identity, or work with different people and experiment? What are your guys' thoughts on that?
I can just quickly say, I think it's important you can do both, but I think it's just important to make sure that you're really staying true to yourself, even as you're experimenting with sound. Like, I used to work with a group of rappers and they weren't really getting the numbers that they wanted. So they decided to try different genres, and they released an EP, and each song had a different genre. Like, one of them was traditional rap and hip hop. One was a pop song. One was a country song. One was a rock song. And it was an interesting project for sure, but it felt inauthentic just because all of their past stuff had been rap and hip hop, and they had a little bit of a history doing that. So experiment, do things, but make sure it's something that you're actually interested in and that it still feels authentic to you and who you are, and not just that you're putting things out there just to make money, because number one, you're probably not going to like it if you're just in it to make the money. And number two, people who listen to it can tell, like they can tell if your heart isn't actually in it as well. So make sure that you really actually are enjoying it. And then that can probably help you figure out, like, should you just work with one person or should you experiment with different sounds and different people? Like, as long as you're happy with what you're doing, by all means, like, see what works for you, but just stay true to who you actually are while you're doing that.
Absolutely. Anyone, do you want to add anything to that? Anyone?
I don't know how qualified I am to answer this, but I just speaking from like a fan's perspective, like I think of my favorite experimental albums and stuff, and they came well after the artist was established. So, it's probably best to first try to establish your own sound first before maybe getting too experimental with tons of different genres, because I think then you're just going to confuse your potential fan base maybe.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, when I was in A&R and I would get demos like what Alexandra just described, I would think this is an artist in search of an identity. I can be country, I can be rock, I can be pop, I can be anything you want me to be. Just it comes across as completely inauthentic. Like you were saying, Alexandra, it's important to be authentically who you are. And we see that. We see people, it's like when you listen to something and you're like, even emotionally or metaphorically, you're like, I don't believe that they believe a single word that they're saying. It's something that you definitely feel, and you don't want that to come across. Here's another question. It said, regarding establishing an agreement to collaborate with an amateur artist, aside from consulting fees, should a specific contractual agreement first be in place? Example, rewrites, evolves beyond the actual demo, a potential clients presents. Do you charge by the time it takes or by copyright share percentage? What kind of agreement should you have when working in that situation?
I can quickly touch that because I know that we're kind of running out of time here. So can't answer like specifically because unfortunately can't give legal advice. None of this is actually meant to be legal advice, but kind of like when you are working with someone, even if it's on a small scale, it's helpful to at least just discuss and come up with some form of agreement, even if they are an amateur artist, just because you are creating something together. And as Kevin said earlier, like a copyright is something that's an original work with authorship in a tangible form, like a fixed medium of expression. So as soon as you guys start working together and you work on something, like you write down, one person writes one verse, one person writes a chorus, boom, you guys are like joint authors in that copyright. Or if you record a demo on your phone and both your voices are on it, you both now have some type of ownership in that because you created it. So no matter how small, it's really helpful to try and get some type of agreement in place because you are now starting this creation process with the different copyrights. In terms of how you charge and do things, it honestly just varies and it just depends on what you're doing. Sometimes people will do a flat fee, sometimes people will do royalties. It really just depends on what the actual situation is, but I'm happy to have that discussion with people, and that's the discussion that we have all the time, figuring out what are you doing, what is actually normal in the music industry. Yes, this is a rewrite, but here are the rights that existed first, and now here are the new rights involved. So no matter how small you think it is, there probably are some type of rights involved that you can just make sure that you have squared away before doing too much.
Okay. All right. So Jasmine, I'll turn it back to you then.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, we have to wrap up. This has been so intense. I want to thank everybody for the comments in the chat box. I've had it on the whole time and it's like, geez, there's a lot of information, a lot of people listening. And the whole intention of this, when I first thought of this, and I was talking to Alexandra actually in LA about this, was that like last month? And I said, I want to do a webinar. I really want to help artists both on the West Coast and the East Coast, And then I was lucky enough to get in touch with Kevin and Ritch, and really, this is really meant to help to move you guys forward. So again, this will be available. I'll be sending out an email to all the attendees with the recording links so that you'll have all the resources, all of our websites, all of our offers, all of this information. But I really think there's so much meat here. We probably could do another one of these. We didn't even get into monetization. So, right, guys? So
yeah, it's not enough time, but yeah.
Yeah, good point. Scoop. Thank you for your note. Yes, do these monthly. That's what I was thinking about. And I think I, for one, would love to continue to educate. So This could be a wonderful series. Again, I want to thank everybody for coming. We will reach out with resources, information, and when we plan the next webinar. Again, this is Jasmine Sandler, JSM for Artists. I want to give a huge thank you to Ritch for moderating this, at the last minute. Really great job. Alexandra for coming on and giving, non-legal advice, but in a very important way that can help all the questions I always get with my clients. And then Kevin, really, you've been a wonderful resource and support, and we really appreciate what you're doing with the Copyright Alliance. So with that, I will say goodbye to everyone. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing what happens with your artist careers.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you for
you.
letting us be a part of it. Thank you guys very much. Alexandra, Kevin, Jasmine.
Thanks, Rich. Thanks, Jasmine. Thanks,
Thanks,
Thank
Alexandra.
you.
everyone. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.